Welcome to another episode of Ronel Talks Real Estate. Now, today we have a very informative and exciting discussion, and we're going to talk all about the facts, the numbers, the stats. And some of you might think this is maybe a bit boring. Others, if you like numbers, you are definitely at the right place. But I think this is a very, very informative discussion for anybody, whether you are a property owner, a tenant, whether you are potentially want to buy or sell, whether you are an investor. It is just good to have this information because it also can help you to make better decisions. And today we're going to do it in the form of a presentation so that you can see the numbers, the graphs, and so forth. And to share all of this valuable knowledge and information with us, we have Esteani Marx. Now, Esteani is the business development executive at Lightstone. Esteani, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Ronel. Thank you for having me, and welcome to all of the listeners. Happy to share some info today.
Yes, definitely. But I think, Esteani, maybe before we jump into the presentation, just for viewers who are maybe not familiar with Lightstone, maybe just briefly share with us like what Lightstone is all about.
Thanks, Ronel. Thanks again for the opportunity. So, Lightstone's been around for just over 20 years. And it's basically the mission and the aim is to help people make informed decisions and in terms of real estate. So Lightstone is able to provide the general public and estate agents or anybody actually, like you've mentioned, that works within real estate and need information in terms of properties to be able to get that information, whether it's on a town level, whether it's on a suburb level, or whether it's to understand the value of an individual property. So there's a lot of different reports that we offer to basically cover all the needs of whoever, needs information pertaining to real estate. And, anybody can access the information. Obviously, where there's personal information involved, there's additional requirements. But, so anybody can visit our website, www.lightstone.co.za. And I'm sure whatever the need is will be catered for in terms of one of the reports that we have available.
Okay, excellent. So we are going to share the website details at the description. So you are more than welcome to go and visit the website and learn more about it. And like Esteani said, anybody can have access to, so you can obviously create a profile and it can just help you with a lot of information. So Esteani, if you are ready, then we can get into all of this.
Is it shared? Can you see it on your side?
Yes, I can see it. Thank you. So I think Esteani, maybe we should just, in terms of what's happening in the property market out there, maybe you can just start off by sharing with us in terms of residential stock, in terms of freehold, sectional title schemes, estates. What do the numbers look like? And then I also just want to mention to the viewers again, we have the first two episodes of Ronel Talks Real Estate is all about property terminology. So if we are using terminology during this session and you are not familiar with it, please go back to those episodes and go learn what all this terminology is all about.
So first of all, let's have a look at the residential stock. So what is happening in the residential market for real estate? And as you can see there on the presentation, we sit with about 7.2 million residential properties registered within South Africa. And we've also there given you a sort of a split in terms of what the percentage is of each of the property types. So freehold, about 80% of the number of properties that we have. Sectional title, about 13%, and then our estates, about 7%. If we look at value, so value is a little bit different because you can see there that the value that sits within specifically estates is quite higher in terms of the number of properties we have in estates, and similar there on the sectional title side. So about 54% of the value of real estate sits within freehold, about 36% sits within sectional titles, and then about 17% sits within our estate. And then just a little bit of a breakdown in terms of the value, the different value bands and the different value types. And as you can see there, when we look at our freehold, the majority of the value sits almost within, the lower value band properties. Whereas if we look at estates on the other side, it's more towards the higher end values of real estate. So quite interesting to see the dynamics and how the different property types fit within the different value bands.
You're absolutely. And then is theory, I think maybe just to confirm, so this is basically across all of South Africa.
Correct. Yes. That's on a national level.
Okay. And then the stats, is it more or less at the end of 2025, or at what time period do we look at?
So this is basically as at I would say the beginning of 2026. So we do update the data on our side. We update data on a monthly basis. It'll never be static, but if we think about the value bands, the properties, and the freehold, the property type that we have, that it won't change that much on a monthly basis anyway. This is just the property or the distribution in terms of where the value sits.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think this is a lot of interesting information, and it's also interesting to see kind of that the estates is still a relatively small in terms of percentage wise, but like from a value point of view, there's obviously sitting a lot of value in the estates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then let's get on to the next one in terms of the stock.
So look at the stock that we've just spoken about as well, so the number of properties and the value of the properties. So you can see that again, where we have properties that are valued almost on the lower end of the spectrum, that's where majority of the stock also sits. So majority of our stock is almost sitting within your under 500,000, almost up to your 2.5 million. So that's where the volume sits. But if we look at the value, it's actually also on the flip side of that. So the value of real estate or the majority of the value sits within your higher end valued properties, whereas minority of the value then sits within the lower valued properties, which naturally speaks to, obviously how the value of each of those higher end valued properties altogether makes up quite a big portion. And then we also broke that down to just understand what is the sort of the stock levels and value levels on a provincial within the provinces of South Africa. And I mean, we won't go through all of that now, but we can see obviously we have majority of our properties is within the Gauteng province. So there we've got about almost 2.5 million properties, whereas the second highest would be your Western Cape with about 1.3 million properties. So just keeping in mind also, and I like to emphasize that, is that Gauteng is the smallest province that we have. So it just speaks to the density also of properties within Gauteng specifically. And then average property values, it's always very good to also track that over the years and to see how that changes over time. At the moment, we're looking at Gauteng with an average value of about 1.128 or just over 1.1 million. KwaZulu-Natal also actually reached the 1 million mark, so 1,070,000. And then Western Cape sitting with about an average property value of about 1.8 million. So we can again see quite the difference in terms of what is happening within the Western Cape as opposed to some of the other provinces within the country.
Yeah, and I think this is also valuable information if you are planning to kind of like move to another province to from a budgeting point of view, and so to really be aware, because I think if you look there, like the Western Cape is in terms of property value quite a lot higher than Gauteng. So I think we need to consider that as well if you are planning to move. Yeah, and I think then if you look at the smaller provinces, they are fairly kind of equal or within a certain range almost, if you can call it that.
No, absolutely correct. Now, I think, if you must always remember that what you have in another province, you won't get for the same price with, in a province like the Western Cape, or similar to that within Gauteng. So if you come from, let's say, the Free State, what you would have been able to get for R1 million, you may not, and you will not get for R1 million in some of the other provinces. So, yeah, it's very important to keep that in mind for relocation and immigration. But also interesting to see how it grows, how the value of properties in these different provinces grow over time, which is also very inspiring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, I think let's move to the next one where we will go talking a bit about bonded stock.
Mm. So we also track, just to understand also where equity is provided within real estate. So real estate as an investment vehicle, and we can see that at the moment about if you think about the entire all the properties within the country, we only have about 50% that are currently still bonded. And one of the things that we actually also picked up, well, or monitored quite a bit over the last few years is, how long people hold on to their properties, and it just keeps on increasing year on year. And this speaks to that quite a bit because people don't necessarily, flip properties quite often and bond again, bond again. It's almost like they pay off their properties and they stay there quite a bit longer than they used to in the years before or many years ago. So yeah, about 30% of property stock are currently bonded. And if we look at the sort of the price bands in which we find the bonded properties, we can find that, you're under 500,000, as you can see there, mostly are purchased with cash purchases. So only about 6% of those are bonded. And then on the flip side, you're almost like over and above 5 million. Majority there also seems to be purchased, using cash. So it's almost your investment type property. So yeah, an interesting dispensation to understand where sort of the bonded values are, as opposed to purchasing by cash.
You're absolutely, Esteani. So I'm correct if I'm saying that obviously if you had a bond over your property and it is paid off, so then you will typically move to the not bonded area, or is that not something that you are tracking?
So we can't necessarily track, how far a bond is in terms of payment of that bond. So that is something that's very unique in terms of each property owner. Some people pay over a 20-year, the term of loans is also very different. And even if you have, like, let's say a 20-year-old or a 20-year loan, it doesn't always mean that you take 20 years to pay off that loan. Some people are able to pay it off quicker. So no, we don't track, how long or how many of those bonds have been paid up, and how far they are in terms of being paid up.
Okay, and then I would also assume kind of if you look at kind of like in how the property market is shifting in South Africa, and I think you've also mentioned that people wait longer before they are buying homes for the first time. But I think, like, we also see quite a big increase in for rental property. And I assume this is also driving it, where you have like in more investors, and you also see kind of like in there's really, I think, especially in Gauteng and the Western Cape, there's quite a big influx of your kind of like you would say, your entry level kind of properties coming into the market. And I assume these are all more kind of bought up by investors, and they probably many of them probably buy cash. And that is also what this is almost kind of like in telling us.
Yeah. No, absolutely correct, Ronel. There's a lot of equity being placed into real estate investments, and as you said, specifically on the rental demand. And yeah, I mean, when interest rates are quite high, then it almost makes sense to rent rather than to purchase because it's much cheaper. And that's where your investors come in. They're able to pay cash. They're not stranded by the or held by the interest rate fluctuations and increases because they normally pay cash. And yeah, absolutely, it just opens up a new opportunity for them in terms of the rental demand within, and not only South Africa. We actually see that happening quite, across border, in the on an international level, where rental demand is increasing as opposed to.
And do you see any correlation in terms of interest rates in periods where the interest rates are fairly high, like currently, that people rather opt for buying cash as opposed to getting a bond? Do you see those kind of correlations coming through?
Yes, I think definitely. If you think about higher interest rates, and yes, our interest rates aren't at the moment the highest that it's ever been. So we just need to keep that in mind as well. There has been times where it was way worse than what we have at the moment. But I think also the uncertainty of, whether it increases or not. Whereas in a more stable environment, people are more relaxed or more willing to take on a 20-year loan or a loan, whichever the period is, because they are more confident in knowing what they're going to pay. Whereas when there's a lot of fluctuation in terms, especially if there's signals of increases in terms of interest rates, then people do hold back a little bit in terms of taking out that loan and not being sure whether they will be able to service the bond should the interest rates keep on increasing. So in those instances, yes, I think we do see more cash purchases because it is a bit more predictable, a bit more safer for investors. As an example, they're not bound by the fluctuation of interest rates.
Okay, very interesting. Thanks, Esteani. So let's move to the next one, and that is all about the average property value per province.
Yeah, so we briefly touched on the average value of a property price in one of our previous slides, and that sits there on the left. We can clearly see, how that differs in the different provinces. It's always good to see it in a graph format. But on the right-hand side, it's also interesting to see, if you think about the values and the stock levels and where that actually sits in terms of the different provinces. So if you just look at the Western Cape there on the very right, you can see that the majority of the Western Cape properties almost sits within the 1 million and above price band. So it's very rare that you would find properties under that value in certain areas, specifically within the Western Cape. So just keep in mind, the Western Cape does include areas such as Central Karoo and those areas where we do find the properties that are a little bit valued, a little bit lower in value. But on the flip side there, if you look at maybe an area like Free State, where we can see there's quite a bit of properties in the lower value band, the 1 million and below, with quite a small proportion that fits within your 1 million and above, specifically, Eastern Cape, the Northwest, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo. We don't see so many in terms of volume for properties above 5 million in value. That typically sits within Gauteng, the KwaZulu-Natal area, and the Western Cape.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, look, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Just keep that in mind. So it's just proportionally where it sits. So, and also if you look at the top of the bottom right, there is the proportion of provincial stock levels that was added since 2020. So the last 5-6 years, we can see that Northwest actually added most properties, if you think about proportionally, so how many they've got, how many they've added on. They've actually added the most properties in the last 6 years. Second to that, the Western Cape, then Limpopo, and then Gauteng, which is also quite interesting because Gauteng used to be one of the provinces that did add quite a bit of properties on an annual basis. But we see obviously where the demand is, that's where the supply will be.
Yeah, that is really interesting because I think I wouldn't necessarily thought about Limpopo and both Northwest doing so well in terms of adding new properties. So yeah, that's very interesting to see there.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So let's move on to the next one. And that's all about the sales over the last 5 years.
Okay, so on the left-hand side, we're tracking sales that have happened over the last 5 years, so transaction volumes. And we all remember, or most of us will remember that, in 2019, actually before COVID, we did already see quite a decrease in terms of the number of transactions happening within the deeds office. But then obviously 2020, when it was COVID, we did see a decrease, or further decrease. But then the interesting times happened where interest rates were quite low, quite very low actually. And we saw quite a bit of an increase in sales happening in 2021 and 2022. So we can see that on the graph. But then, interest rates started to creep up again as we had our election year, and there was a lot of uncertainty at the time. And that resulted in quite a bit of a decrease in terms of the number of properties registering in the deeds office. And that's held steady over the last 3 years. So we haven't really been able to increase that volume. But what is interesting is that the value of real estate kept on increasing. So the yellow line there, just giving an indication of the value that, irrespective of the fact that less properties transacted, the value of real estate and the average value of property kept on increasing. And that's evident in your average selling price just for 2025, last year. You can see there, quite interesting to see the Western Cape again, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, and where KwaZulu-Natal actually superseded Gauteng last year in terms of the average selling price. So, yeah, quite interesting, hey? Interesting times.
Yeah, and I think it's also because I think the general perception out there is that from a sales price or a value point of view, it's been very flat, or even like people feel that they are losing out on value in terms of property. And I think that this is really showing that actually it is the opposite that is true. Like even though from a volume point of view, it remained relatively flat, but the prices are still increasing, and I think that still kind of give you comfort that, like in investing into property, whether it is as an investor or even from a residential point of view, there is still quite a lot of value in property investing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, I mean, some areas are doing very well. Yes, some areas may not be doing so well. And again, that's why information is so important, to being able to make those informed decisions as to, when you are going to make a property purchase, make sure that you have done your due diligence, your homework, and, make the right decision. But absolutely, Ronel, I think, the value still shows. And, it's in the numbers, not so much, but in the value, definitely. It is year on year.
Excellent. So, Esteani, let's move on to the next one. in terms of the age of buyers. I think this is also very interesting stats coming through here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we know that, and just looking at your natural buyers, we know that the majority of our buyers basically sits within, you can see the left-hand graph there, sits within our 18 to 49-year-old. So that's where the majority of our sales are happening, the majority of the buyers. We have, however, seen just a slight decrease in terms of our 18 to 35-year-old buying. And yeah, I think it speaks to, again, the unemployment rate that we're sitting with at the moment, affordability. There's quite a few challenges that the younger generation has to deal with, everybody else as well, but specifically in that age group. So we have seen a little bit of a decline in terms of those transactions coming through, but yeah, majority still happening within your 18 to 49-year-old. And if you look at the right-hand side, we also track what are the price bands that, these different age groups are actually transacting in. Graph, the first four is almost your buyers. So your first-time buyers in the age groups of, let's call it 65 and up, so your pensioners, they actually go for the lower value properties, which is quite interesting in itself, whereas your young typically go for 500 to 1 million price band bracket. So that's your first time. So people entering the market for the first time. And then your repeat buyers, the profile looks quite different, where you can see that now it's people that have built sort of equity within real estate already, and they are able then to move on to almost like purchasing in a higher price bracket or a price band. And there you can see, the distribution is quite equal amongst all of the value band, the age group. Yeah, so majority like your 2 million or 1.5 million at below. And that's the majority of the transactions are happening anyway across the age group.
Yeah, I think what I also find interesting here is if I look at the graph on the left, where it says that repeat buyers is the highest for the 36 to 49 age category. So I assume that would typically be kind of people who started a family and the children are now potentially a bit bigger. Now they want to move to like a bigger property. I assume that is what we are seeing coming through there.
Yes, and it speaks actually to the graph on the right and as well on your repeat buyers. You can see that in that specific age group, that's where majority of your higher end properties are also purchased. So it's almost like your most, let's call it most economically active group, being in that age group or whatever we call it. So yeah, definitely, I think it's there where your kids are, like you mentioned, either almost out of the house again, more established family lives and careers as well, being able to purchase more property and then also a bit on the higher end of the scale as well in terms of value.
Yeah, and I assume it is probably in that age group as well as the 50 to 64, where the majority of people from an investment point of view will also fall in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And also, if you think about your pensioners, that's also where, people typically would then downscale again. So going towards retirement, smaller places, and just scaling down completely in some instances. And yeah, it's quite interesting to see, how there's almost like the circle of life, let's call it that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it is actually very visible. So that is really interesting to see. And then, Esteani, let's move on to the next one. That's about the non-natural buyer. So this is then if I understand correctly, kind of anybody who buys a property either in a company or a trust or so.
Yeah, so this is where a different structure is used. So non-natural structure, yeah, like you've mentioned, a company or a trust or a CC. I don't think those exist anymore, but there are still that are active. So yes, it's almost like your legal entities. And interesting there, as you can see clearly on the graph, that majority of where those transactions do happen is almost like in uh, your higher end properties. And yeah, I think it's for various reasons. It is almost like, there's tax implications or tax structuring that happens, and people have, the ability to rather invest through a company or a trust. And almost like in your 250 and 500 price bands, also we find that that's almost where your investment opportunities also sit. So people, investors, buying a lot of the property in that price band, rent it out, but then they will typically buy that within a company structure rather than individual natural person.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that in the price bands from 500 to 3 million is fairly equal.
Mm,
Yeah, so
exactly.
yeah, so
And
that is
it,
mm,
it can be anybody. Yeah.
mm, yeah, so interesting to see this
Yeah.
as well. Okay, Esteani, we can move on to the next one, and I think this is a very interesting something that most people would like to see in terms of your inflation. Yeah, how does that play out? So this is a really interesting slide.
Yeah, so property price in indices is basically where we track the change of prices in over time. So to think about your consumer index or inflation, it's almost like the rate at which products and stuff we buy becomes more expensive. Um, and that's similar in real estate. So we also track the rate at which the prices of property increases. Now, for real estate, that's a positive. For obviously for consumer goods, it's not always positive. But on the property side, Lightstone tracks the property price changes or inflation over time. And as what we look at here, as we can see, is over the last 10, 11 years, it has been very fluctuating over the in terms of the increase in terms of value. If we just look at the 2019, so remember I did mention in the previous slide that yeah, even before COVID, we did almost see it just happening before then already. So in 2019, and we can see there that in terms of the volume of properties decreasing as well as the value starting to dip into the lower end. And then 2021, 2022, the demand just, crept up again, and we saw some good returns in terms of property values, specifically in certain areas. So the blue line there depicting your national annual inflation, which obviously includes all of the provinces. Um, so when we did see our sort of interest rates increasing again and uh, the elections that happened in 2023, we did see a bit of a decrease in the national inflation, which luckily then started to increase again in 2024 when there was a bit more stability in the market. The only thing that that didn't really pick up as well as on a national level was almost the Gauteng region. So you can see there that certain areas within Gauteng, certain municipalities within Gauteng actually dipped below the zero line. So meaning that it had a negative growth for a specific period of time. And that was specifically your Johannesburg, city of Johannesburg, which yeah, things didn't go so well. There's still some struggles in that municipality. But we have seen some good returns again. We've seen Gauteng doing much better than what we had in 2023. And certain municipalities within Gauteng also doing well. So City of Tshwane, as an example, Not yet where we are on a national level, but yeah, it's hopefully moving into the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as long as it's an upward curve, I think that is all that matters. But yeah, I think it is interesting to see 20 doing relatively well. And yeah, I think there again, in terms of making decisions where to buy and whatever, this really gives a lot of valuable information to make those decisions.
Absolutely.
Hey, awesome. And then I think on to the next slide where everybody is always wondering if I'm currently in the market selling my property, or I'm considering selling my property, like in how long will it take for my property to sell. So I think this is definitely very valuable information in terms of what people can expect.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And Ronel, I think again, it's on a national level, it's on an average level, it's on a median level. But if priced right, a property will sell for much quicker, or will sell much quicker than what is happening on the average. So yes, this is the average. You can see they're hovering almost like on the 90 days across the country. Some areas not so much, so the Western Cape. And I think the reality here is that the numbers for the Western Cape sometimes is a bit skewed in that, there's so much demand for properties in certain areas that some of these listings or properties that goes onto the market in the Western Cape doesn't actually even reach the portal, doesn't actually even reach the listing stage. There's almost like a list of buyers already. As soon as the property comes onto the market, it's distributed to the willing buyers, and it almost sells, without being listed. So I think although the average says 72 or the median says 44 days, it can actually be way less for certain areas specifically. So yeah, currently the average days on market sitting on about 90 days, median sitting on about 70 days. Just keeping the outliers into consideration. We've also broken that down just into the major metros, just to see what's happening in the major metros. So City of Cape Town, as you can see, they're much lower than the other metros. So average 61 days. City of Johannesburg, 94. City of Tshwane, 85. Ekurhuleni, 91. And eThekwini, 90. So yeah, quite interesting. But again, I think just keeping in mind that if priced right, it will sell for much quicker than what is showing on the average.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think this is absolutely the average, but obviously if your property is kind of well priced and the condition is really good and it's at the right location and you find the right buyer at the right time, you can obviously still sell your property much quicker than what this shows. But I think then the opposite is also true, that it can potentially also take much longer than what these averages show.
Yeah, no,
Mm.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, but yeah, I think again it is just good to have a bit of a reality check, because I think sometimes you do your planning in terms of when should I put my property in the market, and you think it will be selling kind of within a week or two, and then you wait like in a couple of months. So this is, I think, very valuable information to have in terms of timing. But yeah, I think Esteani, then I'm very curious about the next slide that you are going to show us. In terms of yeah, you can maybe first just talk us through this, and then I will tell you why I think it's interesting.
Awesome. So what we've done is we've also looked at, just not just, how long do properties stay on the market, but what is the percentage of the listing price in terms of where the asking price had to be reduced? And, also what is the average price paid as a percentage of the asking price? So just to break that down, I'm not going to speak to all of the provinces. Let's just pick maybe one or two. So let's look at the Eastern Cape. So in the Eastern Cape, 18% of the listings that was, put onto the market had to have reduced pricing, or the price was reduced. So it's not a high number. I think if you think about, the number of properties that actually do come onto the market and do actually sell for asking price, it's not a huge percentage that has to be reduced. And if you look on the right hand side in terms of the Eastern Cape of the asking price. So that's also quite good. I mean, across the board, you can see there's nothing really below 93% of the asking price that way.
Yeah, and I think, like what I mentioned, what is interesting here is to again kind of emphasize why it is so important that you price your property correctly in terms of where the market is currently at. Because at the end of the day, it depends on what your market of sellers out there are willing to pay. It's not to think of your property as your retirement plan or something to think, but or I still owe this much on my bond, so I need to be able to sell it for this, or I know, like in that huge property at the end of the street got like this huge price, and now I want to have the same price. So I think there's a lot more going into it than just kind of like in for you to make an emotional decision in terms of pricing your property. And I think we again, like we mentioned, that we've seen now through all of these stats, that if your property is priced right, it will sell much quicker.
Yeah, and this also speaks quite a bit to the previous slide, where we looked at, how many or what percentage reached asking price, and then also where they have to be reduced. But now we're looking at, where it was actually sold and when registration happened, and we can see that on the left-hand side is looking at the proportion of listings sold for less than asking price. So there we can see that in basically Limpopo and Mpumalanga, we found that the majority, that's when the higher percentage was in terms of properties that actually transacted at the end of the day for less than the ask price. It happens across the country. You can see there a minority in KwaZulu-Natal, but it happens in any of the provinces. And then the flip side as well, on the right-hand side, obviously a much lower percentage proportionally, but there are actually properties that sell for more than the asking price. So yes, as much as it happens that people are, or buyers are, pushing down on price, there are areas that demand is quite good, and people are actually willing to pay a bit more just here the purchase of it.
Yeah, and I think there again,
Water, obviously,
Limpopo and Northwest are coming through strongly, as you've shown in the previous one, that there's quite a lot of stock there. And I think that is also something interesting for property investors to take note of.
Yeah. Yeah, and some good returns actually obtained in certain areas, such as Limpopo. I think it was a year or two ago where they had really good inflation rates there as well. So, yeah, speaks to the demand, definitely.
No, very interesting to see. Okay, we can go to the next one.
So just to bring it down to municipal level in terms of the proportion where there's a reduced asking price. So City of Cape Town obviously had the minority in terms of reduced asking price for proportionally the city of Cape Town, so not the entire Western Cape, just looking at the city of Cape Town, and then Tshwane second lowest, whereas the eThekwini, which is Durban, Ekurhuleni, which is the East Rand, and city of Johannesburg had a little bit of a higher proportion of reduced asking price.
Okay, also very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this one is also to me like really, really interesting. And I haven't seen this before, so I'm also very intrigued by what you are going to show us now. But I think this is just also telling us in terms of how ownership has moved in terms of male and female. So is Esteani looking forward to what you will be sharing here?
Yeah, it is. It is quite interesting. So this is just a high-level overview. The next slide will delve a little bit deeper into the details. So just an indication here of how it has changed over the last 10 years. So as you can see, the proportion between male buyers, so individual male buyers, and then I'm going to say couple buyers, not always couples, but male and female buyers, the proportion stayed more or less the same over the last 10 years. But we have seen quite a bit of an increase in terms of individual female buyers. The female buyers also has been almost like the majority of buyer profile over the last quite a few years, actually. So that's quite interesting. And if we look at sort of where the market split is for this kind of ownership, you can see there on the left-hand side, we're looking at your subsidized properties and properties almost like in the lower value band, so under 300,000. That's sort of where majority of your individual females are buying properties, right? So that is just something to keep in mind. And I think, we've spoken quite a bit about the female property ownership, and it's almost like, around security for females, just to have that the financial security in real estate to be able to fall back onto, or just to be able to have a place of residence and something on in terms of financial security. Whereas you can see on the right hand side where there is your male and female buyers together, that tends to be the higher proportion in terms of property over 300,000. And then if we look at the ownership split in terms of the market itself, so there you can see over the last few years how the last years how that has changed. So on the left-hand side, again, you're just looking at what has happened in 2015 as opposed to now, and you can see the increase in terms of female buyers in terms of the lower value property, so subsidized to under 300,000. And then also quite a bit of an increase coming into the female buyers on the above 300,000 in the current market. So although it's still something that the females prefer the lower value properties, we do see them moving up the ranks in terms of a little bit of higher value properties that they purchase as single females.
Yeah, no, I think that this is really encouraging, and I think it is very good to see kind of like in more female buyers coming through, and I think that is what we are aiming at, to really kind of have a more fair representation of females also owning property and creating wealth. So I think this is definitely encouraging to see.
Yeah. No, and it's also speaking to, changes that perhaps in the workspace environment where there's more opportunities provided. But interesting enough, you can see here how we split it out just to see that the sort of how it flows into each other. So as you can see on the left-hand side where the females dominate, the single females dominate in terms of property purchases, and they dominate up to almost like your up to 750,000, and then almost your couples. I want to almost say couple buyers, but it's not necessarily couples, but your female male buyers then dominate in the higher value band. And then, yeah, I mean, the split there then changes again, on almost like on your higher end, where the male individuals then are more dominant than the female individuals. The female individuals dominating in the lower value bands, and the male individuals then dominating a bit more in the higher value band.
Yeah, but I think it is still, if you think about many years ago when we grew up, I think the majority of the property, even for like married couples, it was still kind of like in just the husband usually owning the property. So I think this is also good to see that there's a lot more kind of like in dual partnerships or joint ownership or so coming through. So I think that is definitely also very much encouraging.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting to track and to see, how the proportion is, or the split is, in terms of ownership. And it's almost like, how people choose to secure financial freedom or financial stability or financial security, and what they choose to put that into, where clearly we can see that females, find property to be almost like a reliable source of financial security for them.
Yeah, no, this is definitely very, very valuable and informative information to see and to kind of like, because now it's not only about perception or what you hear the neighbor is saying or what the newspaper is saying. It is kind of like you can see the actual stats and see kind of like in how you can make more informed decisions. So Esteani, anything else you want to share with us? Well, the age of single buyers. I think that is also an interesting one.
Yeah, because it's just also to look at the male female dispensation. So we know that on average the buyer age has actually increased quite a bit in terms of when people are, or individuals are, entering the real estate market. But we can see that from the data also that your female counterparts, they basically dominate almost in your, let's call it 30 to 44-year-old market, whereas the males are almost like in a younger, I don't want to say younger, but almost like your 30 to 40-year-old, age group, or yeah, let's call it age group, where they transact quite heavily. And obviously both female and male, as they get older, less transactions happen. That's, I think, just the natural way of how things are. So it's quite similar for males and females, but females quite a bit broader spectrum in terms of majority of sales happening. And just again, in terms of the female or the single female buyers, so we've said in the previous slide that typically your lower value property, so you can see there again, almost your under 30,000 up to 750, where they dominate in that age group, so 25 to 40-year-olds. And it's also, I think, very important for estate agents to understand the demographics quite well, because that's sort of where your marketing element comes into play. To understand the market, to understand who to approach and how to approach your typical buyers and sellers. So yeah, quite interesting to just see how, where the different age groups are, where the different genders are, at what age people are entering the market, how long people hold on to their properties. And like you say, we need to make informed decisions, and that's where data comes in, and accurate data, to be able to help us to navigate in terms of the real estate market itself.
This is amazing. I really enjoyed this presentation. Is Johnny, just to confirm, this is the last slide?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you have shared like really, really valuable information. And I think it is so informative. Like I said, even if you don't want to buy or sell, I think just to know this about your area. And I think there was a lot of comfort in it as well, because you can definitely see that also, again, like we said, there's a lot of different factors playing into this. So it's not always like across the board, but you could see kind of on average, there's still a lot of good reason to invest in property. And even from a residential point of view, like in over time, there will be good times, there will be not so good times, but at the end of the day, there's still a lot of value and potential into buying into real estate, and to also understand the different demographics in terms of age, in terms of gender, and also to understand how the provinces are doing and where the higher demand is, and also in terms of volumes, sales values. So, Esteani, this was really, really informative, and I want to thank you. Thank you for putting effort into doing a presentation for us so that we can actually see it and not only talk through it. So thank you so much for your time and your effort and your knowledge that went into today's presentation.
No, it's a pleasure, Ronel, and yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it, and looking forward to some future chats as well. I think we all work in real estate, we all love it, and we just want the best for the industry. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And then remember, we are going to share the Lightstone details in the description. So you're more than welcome to go and visit the website and see how you can benefit from Lightstone. Thank you, Esteani.